Let's hear from the Democratic Alliance now. DA spokesperson and member of Parliament Karabo Khakhau joins us now for reaction. Karabo, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think take the platform now and say to us, okay, what is the position of the Democratic Alliance with the president signing the land expropriation bill into law?
Good evening, Osnaledi, and good evening to your Newzroom Afrika viewers. The Democratic Alliance is not impressed with the process that was followed to get this bill passed. We are of the firm belief that if we're going to expect South Africans to recognize law and respect law, let alone abide by law, that as parliamentarians, the bare minimum we can do is to make sure that procedurally we respect South Africans enough to give them legislation that is sober, that makes sense, and that passes procedural muster. So that is the fundamental basis upon which as the Democratic Alliance, we're consulting our lawyers, trying to find a way to make sure that there's sobriety to the process. What is also important to note, Osnaledi, here is this is not the Democratic Alliance saying no to restitution. We're not saying no to land reform. We're not saying no to redress. We believe that we are in a position as a nation, as per Section 25 and its power, to be able to deal with that adequately and to make sure that we not only deal with injustices of the past, but give dignity to people in some cases where dignity has been taken away from them, and in cases where some of the land that has been taken is directly linked to their economic participation. And that is the position that the Democratic Alliance has held across years. What we do not want, however, is to have to find ourselves in a position where the state abuses its power as far as rolling out acts and legislation, and finding ourselves in a position where the decisions of the state do not meet legal master, and that's the problem that we have as the DA.
Okay, so a few issues that you've raised there, and I'm going to go through them one by one. You talk about an act that needs to pass procedural muster. So you think that how we got to the signing is not ideal. Explain why. What is it that you think procedurally has gone wrong?
I'm going to give you one example with the NCOP process, for example. So you would know that if any law is supposed to pass that affects provinces, it needs to meet the standard of negotiating mandates. So what we know with how the process was followed is that you have provinces that absolutely did not follow the route that was necessary, so had no mandates whatsoever. Those would be Limpopo, the Eastern Cape, and Gauteng. They didn't have the necessary sittings to get those mandates passing through the NCOP. That is one. Two, the Northwest as a province did not even vote at all because they didn't have a mandate at all. The only province that voted against was the Western Cape. And then we only have 4 provinces actually who voted in favor. Those would be KZN, the Northern Cape, the Free State, and Mpumalanga. See, those provinces alone, number one, do not make majority. And even if you count in Limpopo, the Eastern Cape, and Gauteng, who would make a majority if you count them together and tally them together, the problem is that the process that Limpopo, the Eastern Cape, followed was flawed as far as what the negotiating mandate rules dictate for members of parliament to do. And these are simple things that as the Democratic Alliance we've always for years been saying shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't find ourselves in a position where when we are dealing with legislation as crucial as this legislation that is supposed to be the make or break of our reimagination as a country, as a democratic dispensation, where we just rubber stamp them, roll them over without paying mind to procedures of parliament. Rules exist for a reason, and we're supposed to follow them, particularly if we're going to expect South Africans to also take the legislations that govern their lives seriously.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting because, I mean, and we'll get some responses as well to the issue of the NCOP process and the majority mandate. But then there is the issue of, you say, the DA is not saying no to redress, but then you've raised the issue that you want to see land that is expropriated, that it happens directly in a situation where it's directly linked to economic participation. Why is that important to raise? And let me tell you why I asked that question. The argument made by many is that many black South Africans, over the years, this is the debate and discussion we've been having, are landless, right? So economic participation may very well not necessarily be the center of this. It is about providing people with land and giving and having that access, correct?
Look, Naledi, what you're raising is very great because this is where the misunderstanding has been about the DA's messaging on this matter. So the current constitution, Section 25 as it stands, has never actually said that the state cannot, in cases whether the land is either for economic good or just for residential use, shouldn't that the rules are supposed to be different or that people shouldn't be given back the land. That has never been what we were saying. We were saying the law as it exists right now has always empowered the state with sufficient resources to be able to do so. Instead, the state wasn't using those tools adequately. And the examples we have would be, for example, where in the Free State, people would be claiming for land in cases where there's land available for them that was once a farm, pone or whatever the project is. They would be given an opportunity to say whether I want that farm and use it or I would choose money. In most cases, families would choose money, and the state and Treasury would have the funds list available for that, right? So that process has always been underway. But then you'd have always had land that has been in the hand of the states that is not used altogether within economic hubs and even outside of economic hubs that could have easily been released by the state to give people dignity and make sure that we don't find ourselves in the situation that we are in. And the state wasn't using that muscle. And that's what really upset us, to be like, but you've been sitting with land and people are saying they are landless, they don't have properties, and you've been sitting with sufficient power to give back the land in some cases to people who forcefully removed, and you were not doing that.
Okay, so given that argument, and I've got to just under a minute for this, but given the argument that you've just put now around, well, there have been previous opportunities before the signing of the act, why does the DA then believe that the signing then took place? So essentially what I'm trying to get at is, within your discussions, when you think about why the act was then signed, what do you think it is?
Look, it's always necessary to have more reasons on the how of the Constitution mandate. And so that is not necessarily the problem, because part of the contention on this matter has been the how element. But even in the how and how we get it, there must be sufficient consultation to make sure that we don't find ourselves in bloodbaths of people fighting and having a civil war in this country, 1. 2, to make sure that all rights are protected. But number 3, also we're supposed to make sure that even within the parliamentary process itself, that the legislation and the laws that we pass meet the procedures that by law they're supposed to meet. And that is it. And have we dealt with that beforehand, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. What we would be having a conversation about is making sure that people have jobs, that the economy, that people have water in their taps, and make sure that failing municipalities are finally able to deliver basic services to South Africans. And we shouldn't be boring South Africans about conversations about procedure, which is we should have gotten right from the onset. What we should be focusing on is direct access to basic services, which are the make and break of the everyday lives of South Africans.
Okay, Karabo, we do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Karabo Khakhau, of the Democratic Alliance.